the feudal lord asked Hasumi Ryuuji to please conquer the legendary rank dungeon and save the territory. Save the territory? Hasumi Ryuuji asks what was going on. The count explains that the dungeon's core was running amok. Faria is scared to hear this, stating that it could not be. Hasumi Ryuuji asks what the dungeon core was. Faria worryingly explains that it is the manifestation of the divine power related to the administration of the dungeon, and they called it the core. The core lied in the deepest part of the dungeon, constantly releasing power and causing the dungeon to develop further. Normally, adventurers stunt the dungeon's growth by exterminating the monsters inside, which in turn deprives the core of its power. But on some rare occasions, the core goes haywire, and the dungeon continues to grow non-stop. Hasumi understood the situation. He then asks if the city of Redom's legendary rank dungeon's core was going haywire right now. The count says that was the case, and if things continue like that, then the city will be attacked by monsters flooding out from the dungeon. Moreover, the dungeon itself would engulf this freedom. The count wishes that Hasumi Ryuuji destroys the dragon's core and prevents that from ever happening. The count was aware that it was an unreasonable request, but he had no other options. Hasumi Ryuuji understood the assignment and said that he got it. This shocks both Faria and the count. She asks if that was okay with him, as the danger level of the legendary dungeon was completely different from that of the S-rank dungeon. He tells her that he needed to go there anyhow, as he needed the divine gate key that was in there. So he tells them that he would do whatever is necessary to do, and that was all there was to it. Faria tells him that she understood what he meant and tells Ryuuji that she would accompany her too. Her father is shocked hearing this. She tells her father that there was nothing that he could do to stop her because, as he had said, she was charmed by Hasumi Ryuuji. He tells her fine. He bows down to both of them and asks them to grant his request. Both Hasumi and Faria are then dropped at the outskirts of the city by the carriage. Then they both plan on getting going. Faria guides Hasumi Ryuuji to the dungeon entrance and he follows her. Hasumi then again looks at Faria's stats, and her job had gone back to adventurer. As he had thought, the job changed depending on the situation. Hasumi asks Faria why she wanted to be an adventurer despite being a daughter of a noble. Faria explains that it was because she wanted to become a knight just like her father, a knight that served under the current monarch and saved the kingdom from the Nexus War. Not that the threat of the war had passed, the citizens were exposed to the dungeons. She also wished to save kids from those dangers at the least. Hasumi then smiles and says that he understood. He then asks Faria if he could ascertain her strength before they get to the dungeon. Faria thinks a little and agrees. She then uses her magic sword to create a magic flame. She crushes the boulder in front of her. Hasumi Ryuuji tells her that it was quite impressive. Even when considering other adventurers, she would surely stand out. She tells Hasumi that she appreciated his comments, but it took a lot of time to use that attack. Hasumi tells her that he knew this weak point. Faria continues, saying that she has never been able to use magic without her sword. She apologizes for being able to wield such useless magic. Hasumi tells her that there is nothing to be sorry for. If she possesses a power that is different from others, then she just needed to anticipate its use and come up with an adequate strategy in accordance with that prediction. She then blushes hearing this. Hasumi Ryuuji asks what was wrong and that they should start moving. Hasumi thinks that he cannot tell if his level is good or not. He wanted to obtain more weapons summoning coins while exploring the dungeon. They are almost at the entrance of the legendary dungeon. Faria tells him that they can get to the entrance of the dungeon's deepest section using magic teleportation formation. Even while knowing that the teleportation would be successful, it was still a little frightening to jump. She looks at Ryuuji. She sees that he had already jumped. She then tells him to wait for her and jumps too. They are both then teleported to the dungeon. Hasumi Ryuuji looks ahead and sees that they were orcs. He asks if they were monsters too. Faria says yes. The monsters were already flooding out of the dungeon. An attack from orcs of those numbers and that strength would be extremely dangerous. Since their intellect were quite low, Faria explains that the usual method for defeating them was by luring and killing them off one by one. But it seemed that this time they would not be able to do that. Instead, it would be dangerous to get noticed by other orcs. Well, in that case, Ryuuji had an idea. He tells Faria that she should use her magic right away. The orcs then notice something. The leg of one of the orcs was injured, the other was confused about the situation. He also gets hit in the head by a rock. He turns around to see that Hasumi Ryuuji was on the top throwing rocks at them. He then jumps in front of them. The orcs look confused too. He then starts running away from them. The orcs also ran after him, they were quite fast. Hasumi uses his magic power. He had already grown fairly familiar with using magic power. He could now perform movements that would have been impossible for him before. So, in that case, he tries throwing the rock while using the magic power. The orc's head blows off in a flash. Just as Hasumi Ryuuji has thought he could also influence the objects close to him. It seemed that there were various ways that magic power could be used. At any rate, it seems that their numbers have now multiplied. Well, in any case, he was soon going to reach the place that they agreed upon. Hasumi stops and turns to the orcs. The orcs looked furious. He then tells Faria that attack. Faria was ready to attack. With her flames-induced sword, she attacks the orcs. She manages to slay multiple orcs. Hasumi was leveling up too. So, his level increased even working with others to defeat the monster too. It seems like Faria had leveled up too. It was the first time for her to use one of her attacks to attack these many monsters. She then turns to Ryuuji and thanks him. He tells her not to sweat it as she had that power already within her to begin with. He looked at the ground to see there were plenty of summoning coins. With them it should be easier for him to proceed with conquering the dungeon. He then sees something. He asks if it is a magic power restoring coin. Faria says that it was. She explains that depleted magic power gradually recovers over a certain period of time through absorption of magic power in the air. But with that coin it would happen in an instant. Hasumi Ryuuji asks how much time it takes for someone to recover naturally. Faria tells that for her it would be an hour or so for her. He then asks what her current MP was. She says that it was 3 out of maximum 120. He sees that his magical power is low too, but not as low as Faria's. He then tells her to carry the coins as it seems that it will be put to better use that way. She then takes the coin. She asks if they shall get going then. He says yes, and they both head deeper to the dungeon. As always, they were confronted with a strange space ahead of them. The walls of the ceiling emitted a faint light. It was almost as if it were prearranged to facilitate human exploration. He tells her to stop. She asks if there was something that mattered. There were other people in the dungeon. They both hide. Hasumi Ryuuji asks Faria if they were also adventurers. Faria tells him that it cannot be that case as the kingdom forbids the exploration of the legendary rank and her father's permission was required to carry out an exploration of that dungeon. And if her father had given authorization to someone that he would have surely told her. Unauthorized explorers, huh? In other words, was that a dungeon looting party or something? Nevertheless, their equipment also looked of a fine quality, and certainly to the guys he had met before they were better equipped. Moreover, there were some pro-combatants among them. They were definitely not ordinary thieves. Faria asks what they shall do, should they follow them. Hasumi says no. Hasumi says that they should capture one of them and ask them directly. This scared Faria. Those bandits were walking in their own way. Suddenly one of them is hit by a stone and looks back. The others ask what was wrong. He thinks that it was his imagination and says nothing. The one in front then tells him to keep of the pace. Suddenly he is attacked from behind and disappears from the back. The man asks who the hell he was. Hasumi Ryuuji tells him to be silent. With the knife in his neck, he threatened to answer his questions. If not, he tells him that he knows what will happen. Hasumi then questions who he was and why they were exploring this dungeon. Faria asks if they knew this was a legendary dungeon, as that the Count's permission was required to explore it. He tells them that he knows, and he just does not care about that. She asks if they were. He says yes, they were unregistered adventurers. Hasumi asks what that was. Faria explains that they were adventurers not affiliated with any of the Adventurers Guild offices. Since the retainer fees are usually a hefty sum, they prefer not to share any profit with the guild and not to pay intermediation fees either. That being said, they also took illegal requests. They were dishonest and disgusting people. The unregistered adventurer asks what was with those harsh remarks. He explains that they were just against the guild's monopoly, and besides, if anyone were to hear just who their client was this time, something like complaining would be. He then stops talking. Hasumi says that he understood it now. His employer seems to be quite a big shot. Hasumi Ryuuji then asks who his employer was. Just as the adventurer was about to say the name, they hear people shouting. The other adventurers were surrounded by numerous orcs. Hasumi and the others were watching from the top. Hasumi sees this and rushes to help them and tells Faria to watch over him. He then uses the summoning coin to summon a bullpup assault rifle, FAMAS 5.56 by 44mm NATO caliber, and starts shooting the orcs. The adventurers were confused about what was going on. Hasumi then shows them the way to quickly get out. They all then rush to that way. They had all made it safe and were relieved. They thank him for the help, but they ask if they were perhaps there to do some looting. Embarrassed, Faria yells at them saying that they were not. She then explains that her father, the Count, had granted them permission to explore the dungeon. They are surprised to hear that she was the Count's daughter and start looking at each other. She then is confused if she was not meant to reveal that. Hasumi tells her that it was the perfect timing to reveal that, as it meant that they did not have anything to feel guilty about. He tells the other to come clean too, as Hasumi explains that he knew who their big shot client was. The adventurers say that if he had found that much, then there was no reason to hide, and tell him that the one who had hired them was the kingdom's monarch himself. Hasumi says in a relaxed voice that he knew it. But in reality, he had no idea and was just bluffing. Faria sees that Hasumi was unfazed, as he did not know anything at all. Hasumi quickly gets to Faria and asks her what they meant by the monarch. Faria explains that the adventurers must be referring to the Royal Highness, the king of the Nexus Kingdom, whom her father had served under as a knight. The kingdom was one among many small kingdoms that filled the continent. However, for the sake of possessing mythic rank dungeons, it stands superior over the surrounding countries. But she was confused as to why the Royal Highness would commission something like this, as this was the dungeon bestowed to her father by His Majesty. Was this not an act of betrayal? The adventurers tell her that they do not care about the client's circumstances and just take the order for the sake of the money. Faria is furious hearing this and tries to attack them, but Hasumi stops her. Hasumi then proposes that he would hire them instead and tells them to cooperate with him to reach the deepest part of the dungeon. The adventurer asks what the payment was. Hasumi tells them it would be the same as the king was paying and all the dropped items in addition to that. But Hasumi states that he was keeping the divine gate and the weapon summoning coins. The adventurers think for a while and then accept, as it would just be hard for them to explore the dungeons with that many orcs running around. They then shake hands on the deal. Faria then silently says that something like joining hands with the party of dungeon looter was. Hasumi tells her to calm down. He states that he does not know what the king was scheming, but the best case scenario was for them to continue with their goal while interfering with his plans. Faria tells him that she understood. Then they start moving. They all then started moving, but one of the looters did not seem happy about this. Exploring through the dungeons, the orcs were everywhere. They kept loitering around there. Hasumi asks if there was any other route that they could take. There was none at all, and they would not be able to reach the deepest section of the dungeon unless they passed through there. Faria had also heard from her father that there was only one direct path available. The adventurer asks what they were going to do, as facing that many orcs head-on would be absurd. Hasumi states that it should be fine as long as they don't face them directly. Faria and the adventurer both were confused. They are shouting out to the orcs and trying to lure them. Two of them start teasing the orcs to follow them. The orcs are furious and start to chase them. They cry out that they have successfully lured them in and beg Hasumi to do something about that quickly. This scene reminded Faria of the time that Hasumi made someone do the exact same thing when dealing with the troll. Hasumi states that it was a given. Choosing a place where you held the advantage on the battlefield was the basic principle after all. The adventurer asks why they were not taking any action yet. Hasumi tells them that they just needed to get a bit closer. The two of them were running for their lives. Good, they were now close enough. He orders the other to attack now. From the high grounds, the mages attacked the orcs with their firepower. They were firing and willing, telling the others not to stop attacking. They were amazed to see that they had defeated so many orcs. Indeed, thanks to that they were able to do their job without difficulty. Suddenly the newcomers from the unregistered adventurers rushed on their own. They were smirking and going ahead. Hasumi notices that one of those was from earlier. Newcomers? Hasumi asks. The adventurer explained that originally, they were not their comrades, they were lacking manpower, so they had to hire some drifting strangers. Hasumi speculates that the king must have sent his spies with them. Faria, in shock, asks what he meant. Hasumi explains that they were to keep tabs on the others to see whether they were working properly or not, and to prevent them from running away with the item, among other things. The adventurer was shocked to hear this and says to Hasumi that they take their job seriously. Faria then asks if they had not reached agreement with Ryuuji and changed sides. The adventurer then tries to change the subject, saying that those people were heading to the deepest section of the dungeon. Hasumi says that it looked like they have to chase after them. But the adventurer asks how they were going to go about that, as they ran while the orcs were distracted, and they had to face the orcs themselves. There were still about 10 orcs left. Hasumi says that those kinds of numbers aren't a problem and asks Faria if they were up for it. They then both rush towards the orcs. They were planning to do it just like before. Hasumi moves ahead to fight with the orcs while Faria gathers her magic. Hasumi manages to imbue the sword with magic and cut through the orcs. He then calls Faria. She was ready. She also uses her sword and kills all the remaining orcs. The adventurer asks who Hasumi was. Hasumi answers that he is just a soldier and tells them that they should not get going. They are all now going deeper into the dungeons. According to the map, the deepest section of the dungeon was just ahead. Just as they reached down the stairs, there was a huge monster standing right in front. It was the king of the orcs.
Thank you for joining us in this recap journey. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. Comment if you have suggestions, want more of the series. Don't forget to share it with your friends. Do subscribe if you want more similar content. This is Universe Nexus, your passport to the immersive realms of anime and manga.